Systems engaged. Frequencies synchronized. Prepare for incoming transmission. Coming to you from somewhere in the multiverse, this is Robots from Tomorrow. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and as always your podcatcher of choice. For the full archive featuring over 800 episodes of comics and comics-friendly content like interviews, book discussions, and freeform tomfoolery, please go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Here is your host, Greg.
Hello everybody, welcome to the show, or welcome back to the show, whichever the case may be. This is, as it no doubt says on your screen, Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg, thank you for joining me. We are just seconds away from a chat with multi-hyphenate filmmaker Wes Eastin about his documentary Shopping for Superman. But first, of course, if you like what you hear today and want to hear more, we've got literally hundreds of episodes over at robotsfromtomorrow.net. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies if you want to keep them confused about your surprise gift of exquisite comics podcasting. You can get the word out about your enjoyment of this show in the comments, or the emails, or the skates, or the tubes, or whatever method you have available to you. You can do that while you're liking, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you are partaking of us, because of course, you know, doing that helps more people find out about episodes like this, and the other stuff we have going on in our little slice of the multiverse, and it would warm our little robot hearts ever so much if you would be so kind as to do so. On February 19th, just 2 weeks away, I'll be talking with cartoonist Kit Anderson about, among other things, her 2025 science fiction graphic novel Second Shift. But for now, let's get right to this chat with Wes Eastin about our favorite home away from home, the local comic book. My guest today is a filmmaker, director, writer, editor, showman, dreamer, many other things. His nearly 20 years in the film business has produced a CV too extensive to list here, so just take my word for it. This man knows his way around getting things out of the ether and onto the screen. He's here to pick up a conversation we started last October when he screened his first feature film, Shopping for Superman, at Baltimore Comicon. A documentary that took almost a decade to see to fruition, Shopping for Superman is a love letter to the friendly neighborhood comic store and is both a wonderful reminder for some and instruction to others of just how important these places have been for getting comics to this point and in taking comics into the future we all know they can reach. The film is available to watch on various streaming platforms and on Blu-ray. You can find out more about it, of course, at shoppingforsuperman.com, and it goes without saying, I highly recommend you do so. The director is Wes Eastin, and I'm very excited to have him here today to talk about the film and its subject matter so near and dear to both of our hearts. Wes, how you doing?
Doing great, especially after that introduction. That gave me quite the tingle. Like, who's this guy? Wes sounds awesome. Can't wait to meet him someday.
Mission accomplished. Okay. As I was putting together my notes for this chat, I did realize there are a lot more directions this could go than I originally thought, so I'm apologizing to you and everybody in advance if I'm kind of extra ping-pongy as we try to cover as much ground as possible. So let's start with an easy one. Gaffer, Key Grip, Best Boy. These are not comic book heroes, but rather production jobs I always see listed, and I never know what the hell they do. So please, what do they do?
Okay, so Gaffer, Best Boy, and what was the other one you said?
Key Grip.
Key Grip. Okay, we'll start with Key Grip. Key Grips are some of my favorite people in the world. I've been one on a few smaller productions. Key Grip is kind of the jack of this trade, and I don't care about any other. I'm going to get your lights up. I'm going to get them modified, anything. They're basically the engineer of a set, more or less. And they're the guy you go to say, hey, make this happen. A cinematographer looks down at the team and says, I want to see this, this, and this. Gaffer is in charge of the lighting, how to make that happen. They work with the Key Grip to say, I need these components to make these lights do this thing that Boss Man just said. And so Key Grip and the Grip team are primarily there to make it happen safely and to do some really incredible stuff that you don't think can happen sometimes. Some days you have, you have your kit and your trucks, all the various implements, C-stands, gobos, all the toys of the trade. And the Key Grip says, hey, we're doing it this way. And sometimes to great effect and other times to, wow, can't believe we did that and no one got hurt because a lot was asked of us and we didn't necessarily have all the tools, but we still made it happen using, wood, sometimes, or we pile enough sandbags to make a tower of this. I mean, it really depends on the project. And so
Mhm.
that explains gaffer, key grip, king of the grips, so to speak.
Mhm.
And best boy is, so there's a best boy for lighting and a best boy for the grip team. They work just under the gaffer and or the key grip, and their job, a lot of times you have day players. Like I've done that plenty, where you show up for a day or two because a regular that they like just isn't there, or
Mhm.
they just needed an extra set of hands that day. And so the key grip, or sorry, the best boy is the constant northern star. They're directly under the key and the gaffer, and they turn to the team and say, boss man wants this, you all do this, you all do this, I'll do this, we need it done in this amount of time. So very
All
rough.
right.
There's some guys out there who are like, I do more than that for, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
general idea.
yeah. Wow, that is a much better answer than I think the question deserves. So thank you for that. I almost was going to say so the best boy is like Robin to Batman, but
No.
then I'm like,
Okay.
I don't
You're
know if I want
actually you're trying to keep it comics coded, and I
to.
didn't even
My That's
go
where my
that route.
brain went, and I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, maybe you don't have to make that fun. I was like, no, let's get it out there. And so
The
and
cinematographer
so
is
do I.
Cobra Commander.
I just sort of threw that out as a cold open question, but I think it somehow actually ties into one of my other early questions. You wear a lot of hats for this movie,
Right.
writer, director, editor, but of course, this is not a one person endeavor. You have to go from I to we.
Hmm.
How easy or hard is it to get people to jump on board with this thing that you have in your head? Is that something that comes naturally to you?
So I'm gonna preempt that with a blanket statement. So if you hear
Oh,
too much of
mhm,
this, feel free to cut it out. I'm a Southerner, and that means a lot to different people, but to me, it's always been anytime you start to brag on yourself, you get a little
mhm,
uncomfortable just because or anyway, talking yourself up, if it can be perceived by yourself, then I just get a little itchy. In this sense, yeah, I think I've been pretty good at presenting what the idea is, and I've been told by people that when it's something I care about, there's a lot of passion behind it. I mean, it's kind of been since I was a kid. Like I couldn't pay attention in the classes it's like, oh, math, who's that for? I don't care. This is dumb. I hate it. But if it were put in a context that I could really appreciate, like if you're good at math, you can fly the Enterprise. I would probably, have a sense of like, okay, math's really important, but the same's true of these projects. Like some things I couldn't sell an apple to a starving man if I didn't really care about, what I was trying to put forward. But a friend who helped design pretty much all of our promotional art and our movie poster, his name's Drew. He had heard me talk about this project for years, and then we had a beer one time when I was back in Atlanta, and he said, "Why do you want to make a documentary about comic book shops? You've been working on this forever." And I just
mhm,
started going into why I love comic book shops and why I want to share that love with people. Like there's definitely no fiscal incentive to
mhm,
tell this kind of story. I mean, it's a niche tale, and a lot of people will say, I already love comic book shops. Comic book shops are dumb. Why do I want to learn more about them? But I think we really take that passion and that love collectively
mhm.
and put that forward. And it starts with one person saying, this means a lot to me, and here's why. And another person say, yeah, it means a lot to me too. It's like a domino effect.
Mhm.
And I can honestly say every person who had a hand in making this film, they have and share that same kind of love. They look at comic book shops as more than just a place to pick up a product,
Mhm.
and that feels amazing. And I know that has to be the case for a lot of projects and may not be true for every single individual. Sometimes a paycheck's a paycheck. We didn't always have that
Yeah,
to give throughout.
yeah,
So love takes you a lot of the way for sure.
yeah. Well, I mean, on the other side of the screen, to the other side of the counter or the drawing board, not everybody who drew that comic that you love was doing it because they loved it. Sometimes they just needed the paycheck, which probably wasn't big enough for what they deserve for the amount of talent that they put into it. But they did it, and it got to you, and you loved it, and it kept things going in a way that got you to this place where you've done this documentary that I think does a really good job of making the point of how good these places can be, how important they've been, but also that they do more than just sell comics. How do you write a documentary?
It's a great question. I ask myself that a lot. At first, the minimal amount of research I did on the process, I did speak to some people who've made documentaries, but everyone has their own style. And in some cases, people say, I write it beforehand. I know, and in some cases, you can do that, where say like a Ken Burns is going to sit down and research the Vietnam War. And
Hmm.
luckily, that has come and gone. So we have a lot of places to pull information from. For
Yeah.
me, I could build something like a rough timeline. And thankfully, Dan Garino's book about comic book shops really helped me keep my thoughts straight, because it's hard to talk about comic shops in a linear timeline when you're trying to explain the history of it, sure, but if you pick any one node historically and you want to follow that to completion, you're leaving early 1970s and ending up in late 90s. But if you do that, you're skipping over so
Hmm.
many other parts. So a lot of what I had to do was place it on the timeline, and as people are talking, follow a conversation.
Hmm.
And my goal was to have as little of my voice as possible. So most of the writing was more or less taking the subject that we were focusing on, and if someone else had a nice thing to follow up with a previous point, it feels more like we're naturally, almost conversationally, going through these different topics. And then I look
Hmm.
at that and say, well, I'm missing a gap here. I'm missing a
Hmm.
gap there, and I could go shoot more content, and it could just be nothing but talking heads the whole time, and minimal narration. But I thought narration's really important to keep us grounded, and I could also maybe briefly cover some ideas or introduce some topics that way, so I can have
Hmm.
non sequiturs throughout. And I think it came together very well. So the writing of it just became, well, what do I really want to say here in as few words as possible? Not something I'm really great at when my mouth's going, but when I'm writing, I can sit and go, how does this feel? Say it out loud, have some people I trust who do voiceover to read it back to me. Mike
Hmm.
Quirk, our narrator, it was great hearing his voice. And even people told me later, it sounds kind of like you. Mike told me that at
Yeah.
our LA screening. He said, there are times your voice and my voice doing this sounds very similar. Why didn't you just do it yourself? And I said, I second guess everything I do. When it's the writing, when it's making the call while editing, I'm pretty sure about what I'm doing. I have to be. When I'm performing, like in a thing that I'm not a professional voiceover artist, I would
Hmm.
just be sitting there like, I say is weird. Should I say is like that? I don't know. Maybe I should go back and retake that. Maybe if I
Yeah. Yeah.
have to pay for studio time from Mike Quirk to do it, I trust that I'm getting what I want, and I can tell him what I don't like. And at the end of the day, it's
Hmm.
done. So I know that's a very roundabout answer to how do you write a
No,
documentary,
no,
but a
no.
lot of considerations are there. Like, how do you do this? I don't think there's any right way. I will say, if you can sit down and essentially write a research paper about your topic from start to finish and justify it with your works cited the way you would for,
Hmm. Hmm.
your old school paper.
Yeah.
If you do that, you're going to have an amazing time of this, because you've actually collected your narrative from start to finish. You know where you want to draw and what points you want to make, and then
Hmm.
you can deliver a product much more quickly than some of us who take a few extra years.
The long and winding road from idea to screen. It finds this middle place between being a research paper, which I would love, but I could see the commercial possibilities of that are probably not great, versus something that's super poppy but doesn't have anything more than like Biff Bam Pow, comics aren't for kids or whatever. You do find a really good balance of having different voices in there, current voices, older voices, all of that stuff. It's a good job, is basically what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
going back to the constructing of it, according to your credits, you interviewed over 40 people on screen. You
Mhm.
shot at about 3 dozen comic shops and locations over the course of this thing.
Yeah.
When you go to interview somebody, let's say you're about a couple of years in, you're going to visit, a creator or whatever. Is that just you and a camera? Are you taking a crew? Is this like, talk about one of your off-site interview experiences?
So a lot of where I started in Los Angeles when I was living there, you have quite the variety of comic book shops that are within
Hmm.
20 minutes to an hour, depending if it's 3 miles or 5 miles, traffic being
Yeah.
the fun gag there. I had a lot of willing participants who said, yeah, you can come in and shoot our store. You know, we shoot our store for the Eisners every year to make a video, that sort of thing, free promotion, whatever. But at the end of the day, really, and this will strike people in the early 90s and late 80s as kind of odd. Most comic book shop owners that I met, sweetest people in the world. I almost feel like I could walk in and be like, would you buy me lunch? And most of them would probably look at me funny and say, okay, like they're that, don't do that. But they're very kind, they're very giving people for the most part. The sense of community that you get when you go into these stores is palpable. And so when I first started out, a lot of it was, well, what defines a comic book shop as different from any other? Because there are stores that look pretty similar when you walk in. There's a lot of, I mean, if they're doing things right, most of the same material is
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
each store, depending on what their market demands or what it's shown itself to be. Thinking about like, well, what is a unique looking store? Or when I walk into a shop and go, this is awesome. This feels like the perfect clubhouse vibe. Some shops are just that. Like when you walk in, you're like, oh my God, I could spend hours in here. This feels great. Others can be a little cold or empty and are perfect for people who are like, I can find exactly the thing that I'm here to do or
Hmm.
get. So that's kind of what started just popping into a store, leave the gear in the car and just walk in like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you mind? Some people look at you kind of funny and go, okay. And then others say, oh, that's cool. Tell me more. I remember the folks in Michigan, Green Brain Comics. It was end of the day and I was working another job. So I'm exhausted. And as quickly as I'm speaking now, I think turn that up by like the 1.5, like the sociopaths who do that on podcasts will sometimes do.
God, I
And
can't.
so they were just stuck with me, like, I'm making a documentary. It's blah, 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 blah. And both owners were there and kind of looked at each other and they're like, you can shoot as much of the store from outside as you want. And I said, heard, got it. And I saw them a few years later at a Comics Pro event. And I was like, I was the weirdo that day that came to your store. Like, we remember you. I was like, who would forget? Just the keyed up guy who's like, I want to shoot a movie about your store. Please let me in. Love them, love their store. But it falls into that very
Mhm.
specific, unique looking
Mhm.
store from the outside. You go in, very much their own layout, and it works great. Those were those initial considerations for stores. And unless you're like the comic book couples counseling podcast, Brad and Lisa,
Lisa.
yeah, their commitment to going to as many stores as they have done is wild to me. Like I am incredibly envious because some of the shops they found, I'm like, oh man, I wish I'd known about that store. That seems like it's either a unique architecture that the owner found and has just been
Hmm.
in one store that straddles a canal, or it's
Oh.
very, very, more like an inlet or a water. Yeah,
Water
yeah,
is
it's
involved.
water. There is water. But what I'm saying is like the amount of time it would take to go to this many stores to discover all these like amazing goodies. I had the time, I did not have the money, and I'm really impressed with the way they've been able to do it.
Hmm. So you went and talked to people. You did a lot of in-person, like location shooting, but you've also done in this a comic shop being built at the beginning of your documentary.
Mhm.
What had to be on screen for that? I
That's
mean,
a
like
really
comics, but you're just like, okay, you can't have a comic shop without, well, I guess you can technically have a comic shop without comics, but like you can't have it without X, Y, and Z,
right.
X
Well,
Men, blah, blah, blah.
what does it mean
Yeah.
today? What do you have to see to sell the idea of a comic book shop? I mean, the idea came, I wanted to rent a store for our B-roll, for all of these more like artistic choices. But speaking with a few friends that I've made along the way, I said, well, how much would you charge to rent your store to a film production and what would you expect? And they said, well, we take in this much every day. So the hope would be, we can get somewhere close to our minimum. Plus, you need to have this amount of insurance, plus this, that, and the other. And I realized it would be as expensive if I rented a movie studio, like a production studio. And the more I thought about that, I thought, well, I mean, how hard would it be to build a comic book shop? And Molly Coffey, who is one of our
Hmm.
producers and an amazing set designer artist in her right, really heavy in the Atlanta scene. I said, what if we built a comic book shop? And she just laughed at me. She's like, good luck, because the amount of material you need to do that is considerable and your budget
Yeah.
is what it is. It makes more sense to take over a comic shop where that's just there.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I started thinking like, well, I bet we could do it. And luckily Kenyon College, where I work now, I work IT there for my day job. they have a very lovely black box-ish soundstage. And it's minimal, it's everything you need. And I asked them, like, would you all be willing to let me take this over in the off season when you don't have students through, like into the semester? And they were amenable to it. They said, just don't burn the place down. So little by little, I owned a spinner rack for some B-roll. I found some glass cabinets on an Ohio state auction site that someone was getting rid of. Same thing with the racks, found a comic book shop that sadly was liquidating some of its assets, in-store displays. And a lot of the other stuff was just me reaching out to different people like Diamond Select Toys. Zach Oates over there sent us a bunch of figurines, statues, stuff like that wasn't necessarily moving. It was like, you have them if you want them. And almost everything I owned that's comics related kind of went into the store. Folding table with long boxes. You see that everywhere. So when you look back at it, and we took most of the older shops that I would go to, they would have something like a pegboard or some kind of bulletin board that was always covered with posters or the little kitschy knickknack crap you'd get from a Wizard magazine or from previews or something. So that kind of took the shape of our very minimalist comic book store. And every time I would see it, I'm like, this is great. And my art designer, or head of art, Abigail, she said, well, it's a comic book store. So if you're not going to have walls, we need to pack as much stuff in this space as possible. I was thinking minimal and small. She's like, no. Every inch that we can put stuff, it needs to really pop, because that's what a comic book shop is. It's depending on how long they've been around, it's almost a museum of this culture of this stuff as it collects. You'll see a Youngblood poster on the wall and be like, well, wow, you guys have been here a while.
Vintage Youngblood. It's almost like an archaeological dig where you have the recent stuff and then below that is this, and then below that is this. If you keep digging far enough, you're going to run into your Spawn, and then back to that, you're just, I don't know.
It's a group poster. We've gone too deep, It's...
Yeah. And I do like the minimalist sort of approach, like the platonic comic book shop, to be able to cut back and forth to that, like as somebody's describing, like, Zap comics got sold to a kid, and then we see a kid with a Zap comic. It helps visualize the idea, which is probably what you were intending. Quick question. How important were the pants that Mike McGrath provided?
Vital to. So what you're referring to is in the credits. There's a note for pants provided by Mike McGrath. I left a pair of pants at his house while coming back from a trip to New York, I would say, along the drive. He lives in Northwest PA. And I left my pants, and I said, oh no, I need these pants. I forget why, but I was short of pants, needless to say. And he was kind enough to send them to me. Mike has been one of those voices who, every time I would see him around the fire pit in the backyard or whatever, when I was living in Northwest PA, he would ask me, how's the documentary? What are you doing? Anytime I had a push, hey guys, I'm doing a fundraiser, Mike and his family would tend to throw me some spare change. Actually, one of his daughters, she became a producer on the film, whether she wanted to or not, because there's a little Easter egg at the end of the film that I was like, oh, I want to get this, but we are entirely out of funds, and I need the money to donate to a person in order to get, there was a lot of like, you grease this palm, you do that. And she heard about this out of pocket. She's just like, here, do it. And I said, oh, okay. She's like, I expect a copy of the movie as a result. I was like, you're now a producer of the film. And pants barely covered is kind of my point. Like Mike did a lot without really doing much, if that makes sense. But that amount of support and kindness, I mean, you don't see that a lot when people really believe in a project that you're, I wouldn't say I was struggling with it. I was struggling to finish it for sure. At a few key points, and having people like that every so often just saying like, no, this is something you believe in. My wife's one of those people. She's like, you need to finish this thing. It means so much to you. You really need to push and get this done. And I was like, okay, we'll figure it out, find a way.
All right. Put on the big boy pants and just.
I did by Mike McGrath.
by Mike McGrath. Somebody had said that a movie is made 3 times: in the writing stage, the shooting stage, and the editing stage. How much did shopping change over those different stages from what you envisioned or what you were thinking when you started?
Enormously. And my original concept was, I want to make a documentary about something I love, because that'll bring me back to it. If it's not a funded thing, if it's something I'm doing just to make a feature, which I was very keen on doing, what better topic than comic book shops? But what else can it be about? Apparently everything, because at one point I was thinking like, well, I want to talk about fan culture and just how there's been various levels of appropriation or toxicity, like gatekeeping, like denial of valid fandom, because now this is
Hmm.
such a mainstream thing. I want to talk about that. Well, and that would lead me into something like cosplay or cons or this and that. And I got so
Hmm.
far away from that initial concept. And then as I thought it is more of a history lesson, that's an important part of it, but that's kind of boring. And it
Hmm.
can't really exist without talking about comic shops. So that means I should bring in the comic shops that have been around as long as they have, or are somewhat new and kind of
Hmm.
taking the traditional model and turning it on its head. But then you could make an entire film of just that. And but would that also be a boring topic for people who aren't so interested that they want to see every iteration of a comic book store? So it definitely changed in a lot of those states. But then when I looked at the amount of footage that I'd collected over the years and the different ways I was trying to approach this, like it's not going to be a Weissman style documentary where we follow one shop owner through his store over the course of a week with some sort of stakes, like we got to make rent and we're behind on this. If it's not going to be that, then I need to find a way to put all of this together as one package thing. I never envisioned it as the final project that I delivered.
Hmm.
That would come in fits and spurts when I would see it over and over again. And your brain's processing this whether you know it or not. Like I'd wake up in the morning some days and be like, that's a good idea. Or that whole opening sequence that came from having too much of an edible one evening while we're
Okay.
watching the movie Maestro. And my wife's like, are you okay? I'm like, this is too intense. And I just went to the
Hmm.
other room and just started writing like this. Oh my God, I figured it out. I finally have the opening to my movie to bring it together. So
Yeah.
three is charitable to say that it
Okay.
has three versions. Because even in the final, when I look at it, I kid you not, I had a dream last night where a very wise person was like, your movie has two introductions in it, and it only tells this much of a story. And I wake up like, what part of my subconscious is still trying to make the movie that I'm done with? Like I
Hmm.
am very pleased with what I did. I'm delighted, not just that it's done, but with the result. But there's still a part of my brain processing like, how do we make this better and or improve upon it still, you know?
Hmm. Do you see yourself ever doing a follow-up? Maybe
Hmm.
given another 10 years, having some distance, coming back to the topic.
I think I could definitely focus on some elements involved with, and gladly, honestly, with certain elements of the culture of the industry. But I
Hmm.
think my initial reach was a little too broad with trying to tell the history of something that is still ongoing. And
Hmm.
I encountered that constantly, like either pre or probably it had to have been post COVID. DC decided they were going to start doing their own distribution.
Oh, the lunar district. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the Lunar. I had already covered the time Marvel had done that with Heroes World. It was a part of the movie. I'm still making the thing happen. And I just said to myself, okay, this is when I really need to crank this out and finish this movie because it's going to be perfect on the heels of this and whatever the fallout is. Because almost every retailer I spoke to was furious.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Lunar's a competitor. They're the this, they're that. And as many problems as people had with Diamond, change is not always welcome in this
Right, right,
industry,
right.
especially with the potential for loss of product, delayed
Hmm.
product, etc. And so I thought, well, this is the time to do it. And I didn't make the cut, and I still had so much left to do. I didn't even have the post team that I got after our Kickstarter a couple years ago. I realize now, like it trying to tell a story that is still ongoing is pretty difficult without defining the parameters and the context of that story. Other people have tried to tell the story of comics, and it's taken them as many years as it did me to get a product out because it, like I said, it's ever evolving, it's ever changing. But if I wanted to focus on something specific, honestly, I've thought about the effects of Wizard Magazine. That's a topic
Hmm.
I've really wanted to cover for a while because it's that same kind of love. Like I know a lot of the problems with Wizard Magazine and a lot of
Yeah.
the issues people have with what it did, but it did some instrumental things as well. For the first time, we had this very centralized, this very, how do I want to say this, cultivated magazine that went from so many pages to so many pages and kept getting thicker and thicker.
Hmm.
Questionable price guide notwithstanding, but then became Inquest and Toy Fair and all these things and really celebrated the culture of geekdom at a time that it was not mainstream. It was still looked down upon pretty broadly by the mainstream. It was sophomoric and it delighted in its sophomoricness, and I
Hmm.
think that's why it resonated with so many people. It's like the notion of like nerddom and really owning it, or geekdom, or however you want to describe that fandom,
Hmm.
really saying like, yeah, this is ours and we love it. And as silly as it can be, we're going to make it sillier. We're going to, really
Hmm.
celebrate this culture. So that's another aspect I'd love to talk about, because it definitely touches on the effects in the direct market, in the industry as a whole, and gave fans more of a voice than smaller zines and conventions may have done at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
So that's definitely on the calendar for at some point. We'll
Yeah,
see
yeah,
if it ever
yeah.
happens.
You do have Jim McLaughlin's number, so you definitely have an in on being able to tap into the heyday of Wizard.
Jim's an amazingly kind guy, because that the bulk of the interview you see in the movie, that is the
Mhm.
second time I interviewed Jim. The first
Mm.
time we had a hard drive failure along the way doing backup. Like, I had redundancies, but I lost a good bit of footage that some of it was not crucial, obviously, to finish the film. But from day one, when I can get Jim involved, great. He lived not too
Hmm.
far from me in Van Nuys. Heck yeah, let's do this. And so I have some of his audio from that original interview, but the picture wasn't there. And so I reached out and I said, Jim, can we do a verbatim? I have the questions still. Can we cover these topics? And he just said, oh my God, fine. Okay, I guess. And so loved him for that. And I could tell a
Hmm.
couple of times he's like, you're asking me this question again, and you want me to phrase it like I did 6 years ago. Get out of here, kid. You bother me.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just love
yeah.
what he
Like,
what he has done and what he still does, like with the Hero Initiative and all that.
so yeah, so you've been building this movie over 10 years. You have interviews with so many different people. How much of your recorded material do you think made it into the final product?
That's an interesting question. My instincts tells me like, oh, from all of it, I want to say a little more than 10%. The problem
Mm.
with doing the interviews the way I did them is I had the questions I wanted to ask, but I was not a documentary interview professional, despite
Hmm.
doing
Hmm.
it a lot, somewhat infrequently, despite the volume. And so sometimes people just wanted to talk and they would just go, and I would converse with them. I tell them that kitschy thing, like, we're just having a conversation, don't worry
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
they roll their eyes. But then when someone gets on a tear and wants to talk about something, I'm not going to stand in the way. So some
Right.
interviews 4 hours, some interviews 45 minutes or less, because it's like, well, I'm here to answer these questions, now get out.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, talking with Joe Field over at Flying Colors, he said, I know you want to maybe not put all the documentary out there on the internet for free, because you want
Hmm.
people to try to cover the cost of this thing and so forth by renting and buying it. But you have so many interviews that
Hmm.
there's no way you put much of them into the movie. What would you think about just uploading them to the internet? And I thought about it. I was like, well, I don't want my voice in it because I didn't mic myself. And I'm also kind of nervous talking to some of these people, because, some of them are heroes of mine. And I'm just like, okay, I'm seemingly timid. And some of them I've tried to polish as I put them up. And I've seen people respond to them, whether it's polished
Hmm.
or whether it's just a raw interview where here's the timeline. The
Hmm.
benefit of that is that was what was
Yeah,
said. And this is the
yeah.
context of what it was said in.
Hmm. Yeah, his comment was what I was going to, and I think I may have heard you talk about that in a different interview, because I was thinking in the same way of Will Eisner's Shop Talks, right? Those interviews in the back of the Spirit magazine, but then eventually the audio tapes. So we get to hear Will Eisner and Jack Kirby talking for 30 minutes, or Will Eisner and Neil Adams talking for probably 90 minutes, because Neil had the gift of gab. And there is obviously a value to that type of material, especially for people that are sadly no longer with us. I would hope that at some point that type of archive can be shared with the public in some way, shape, or form, because certainly we see enough in the movie to be like, oh man, I want to hear more from that person or that other person or whatever.
I'm rolling that out slowly on our YouTube channel. One of the worst interviews I conducted, and it's my fault, was with Mark Evanier, because
Mm,
I had very hungry eyes and a very small stomach in some ways, because I hadn't yet figured out what the overall project was about, and I still had certain ideas. Somehow got Mark's information, probably from Scott McCloud, actually, because he said, oh, you should talk to Mark. Mark loves talking about this kind of thing. And if you don't embarrass yourself with your initial ask, he'll probably give me some time of the day. And I went in and I'm watching it now, just trying to make sure. Let's take out the most asinine moments on my part because I would ask some questions and I would see him just kind of lean back and I could tell he expected a much better conversation than what I was able to
Yeah.
bring. And like while sitting in his office, I mean, if you know anything about Mark, I'm seeing some artwork on the walls that I'm like, that's an uncolored Jack Kirby right there.
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody's going to have Jack Kirby art on his wall, it's
Right.
probably going to be Mark Evanier.
I even asked, like, can I photograph some of your stuff here just for B-roll? He said, I prefer you didn't. And I was like, I get that.
Fair enough.
This is incredible to be here. And then realize like I did not come prepared in a way that I hoped I did. And that experience informed a lot. Because I still want to put the interview out because he gave me the time. And he even talked a little smack about a film I'd been a part of previously about Floyd Norman. They'd interviewed Mark and credited him and all this. And when they put the movie out, they cut all of Mark's stuff. And he's like, those jerks, they took up my time and I thought I did a really good job. And then not even in the movie. And Mark's not in mine either. So, but it's not his fault. And it taught me a lot. And that embarrassment really drove me to tell people, like, I promise not to waste your time because I wasted his, I think. And I don't want to do that again. And it caused me to really like step up my game in a lot of ways. So apologies to Mark Evanier.
So this took like almost a decade. I would think that the movie is obviously better for having the extra time, not only the stuff that you got, but you as a filmmaker / as a documentary filmmaker. Can you think of any other lessons having those extra years and years, as frustrating as they probably were in some ways, made you better at doing this type of thing?
I think all of the factors that went into making this movie became like technology really made it possible. I was able to afford better equipment at a more reasonable price that I could own rather than rent. So I could run off and do something last minute. I don't recommend buying an entire production studio because you want to make a film. But then with COVID, what we're doing right now, online teleconferencing became so much easier that I could look at someone's reel in another state. Some of my later interviews, I would talk with someone in Chicago or Washington or whatever and say, hey, I'm going to invite a stranger into your home, but I knew what their kit was. I knew their experience and I could tell them, hey, this is what I've shot. Make it look better than that or, comparable at least. And sit in a laptop world and talk to them and see the camera feed. They could pipe that right into the laptop. So instead of a webcam, I'm seeing, through $10,000 or slightly less video camera.
Okay.
And so I see what I'm going to be cutting later anyway. And so I can just sit here in another state and not have to fly there and do X, Y, and Z. So that aspect is always true, like technology becoming more available and the means to do things remotely in some cases makes a huge difference. But also my understanding of what story I was trying to tell. I mean, I said that before. I tend to hurry up at the last minute when there is a tight deadline. I don't recommend that if you can avoid it. But if someone had handed me our budget, I don't know if I could have gotten the same result, certainly, because a lot of the people who helped make this happen, some were older friends, some were people that I met along the way that we got along and they did me a favor. And I tried to pay everyone a comparable rate. But there were times where I would lean towards a person who's a good friend. Like, I know I only paid you X, but if I flutter my eyelashes, will you do Y and or Z? And so I don't think this movie could have happened for the same price 8 years ago. I mean, even if I had all of my ducks in a row with, you're going to interview this many people, like as I would interview one person, they would tell me, oh, you should talk to this person. And I'll put Jeff Smith. I did not have access to Jeff Smith until I lived in Ohio because now, hey, I'm close to Columbus. Your comic book store of choice is my comic book store of choice. The guy who made the documentary about you is actually one of the producers. He's the father of my wife's good friend / department chair, college she was teaching at's wife. Like there were these connections that just kind of it had to take I'm not a spiritual person or supernatural minded person, but it happened when it was supposed to happen.
Something you said to begin that is something I want to go back to. Some of the interviews you conducted, you were remote. You sent somebody with a camera to the interviewee's place. So you're conducting both a remote and in-person interview simultaneously.
Mhm.
How was that experience? Because you've done so many interviews face to face with a person, and
Right.
obviously we're all now comfortable with this Zoom thing, but having more of like a technical question kind of going on in your mind as you're trying to interview, you're making sure the feed still works at this, at that, or whatever. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, to back up a little, some of the interviews, I was Dick Van Dyke from the Mary Poppins movie. Like I was
Mm,
schlepping all the equipment, I was setting it up while bantering with the person, trying to keep them comfortable, while
hmm.
also not touching on topics I want to come out of them naturally as a first reaction or
Yeah, yeah,
response.
yeah. Yeah.
And that is exhausting. And no matter how good you are at it, something will suffer as a result. My brain goes to the old Star Trek, Starfleet Academy games because nerd, but you could only appropriate so much power from the ship's
Hmm.
engines to whatever, and you had to be strategic, right?
Yes.
So a lot of times something would fail. Either I'm talking to them, and so the camera's not getting focused every time they lean forward. Most of the stuff you see with Chuck Rosansky, where he's just
Hmm.
in his ocean of comics. My wife and I were driving cross country, and I popped in, and I'm trying to interview with a dumb lens where I'm like, well, that's the depth of field we get, is what we get, because I have to talk with this man. I can't just stare at a camera and not be
Yeah.
invested in this
You have
conversation.
to engage. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So whether it's remote or whether it's in person, having other people to handle the technical aspects is a lifesaver. It is a game changer. Remote is even better because I mean your audience can't hear or see rather, but I'm wearing a bathrobe and very comfy in my home office. That's really nice. So when I'm
Hmm.
like to talk to someone about something that I want to commit all of myself to and trust that the person that I've hired is going to set up the lights the best way. They're going to give me a great frame. We can talk about that, but I don't have to really worry about the bells and whistles. I'm focused just on the interview portion and hopefully everything recorded.
Hmm.
Um, Not having to do cross country flights, get hotel rooms, feed yourself while also not panic about every small thing that doesn't work out exactly as it's supposed to. It
Yeah.
just takes so many moving parts out of the process for
Ooh.
interviews across the country, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. One thing I did like, sorry, I don't want to say about that. There are a lot of things I liked about the movie. One thing in particular I liked was the inclusion of historical things. So it was interesting, like as you're hitting these topics, my brain was like, okay, I'll wonder if I'll see X or Y or Z. Like if you're talking about the direct market, oh, I wonder if he'll mention Carol Kalish. Oh, he does. Oh, now we see pictures that we get to hear from her partner and everything. Talk
Yeah.
about not only just reaching out to these people, but also building the visual part of it, the material that you're going to use to ground these stories in the type of visual landscape that let them become such a part of the readers and the customers that they remember. Because you did a
Sure.
really good job of framing this material in its context, I guess would be a way to say that. Talk about that for a bit.
The first thing that comes to mind is something I used to do when I was a kid. And trust me, this does relate. So I'm not just babbling. I would think of a movie or a show that I really liked when I was bored because we didn't have cell phones and all the what have yous. And so if I was just stuck listening to a teacher talk about math or something dumb, I would think about characters of a film that I really liked. And I would start to think, like, what are the props or the costuming that come to mind? What is it about this movie that makes these characters these characters? Peter Pan would be like, well, the brother John, he had the glasses, he had his little hat, he had his nightgown, whatever. And I would do a lot of that silly stuff. And so when I'm making this film, or was making this film, I was thinking, like, when we talk about someone like Carol Kalish, what material exists of her apart from just photographs, which I couldn't find a ton. And quite
Hmm.
frankly, I didn't want to reach out to too many family members and say, hey, can I have your cherished memories to put in this film? Because
Hmm.
you can hear in Richard's voice, it's still a very touchy subject for many. And I try to not be too invasive. Now I wish I had. Like I wish I had every piece of material that ever existed about this person. But there's only so much you can do and find. And so I started thinking, okay, so if we're talking about something, we need to see something. I don't want to just have an hour and 26 minutes of talking heads. And
Hmm.
so finding, thankfully, the many things Carol had done that had survived or that I could find on places like eBay or talking to various collectors. There's Aaron, oh, it's escaping me now. He was definitely one of the people I thanked. Oh, Copeland, Cape. I'm sorry, Aaron, if you're somehow listening to this or someone describes it. He collected convention guides,
Mm-hmm.
ones you would get at the art conventions, and he had an incredible selection of them. We were talking pre-COVID, and I said, would it be possible to work out some kind of deal where you send these to me and I photograph them for whatever setup I need. Like if I'm creating a vignette where I need to see some of these elements in real life because I don't want to do too much digital, despite all the digital reproductions you see in the movie. I want
Mm-hmm.
as much real material as I can get a hold of and shoot it adequately. And he said, yeah, we can do something like that. And then COVID happened. And I didn't hear from Aaron for a while, and Aaron's an older guy, and I thought, hopefully Aaron's well, because I kept
Mm-hmm.
messaging him, getting nothing. And come to find out, COVID had hit him pretty hard, and he said, no, I'm still interested in helping you. And he sent me boxes of these
Mm-hmm.
things. Some of them were like pristine, and I would go online and look at eBay and like, oh, this one guide I'm holding in this condition is worth like $100, and that's in a box of other material. So I felt kind of nervous about actually photographing a lot of it because it wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
just me, other people, and we're not archivists. And I wanted to be as kind to his material as possible. Luckily, Kenyon College has this giant German, it has to be German with the name on it. It's this incredible book scanner that has pedals and has like different tiers that you can raise and lower so that you don't break the spines of books with a
Mm-hmm.
glass cover. And it'll photograph the material that you lay out on it, and I
Mm-hmm.
forget how many hundreds of dots per inch. And so a lot of the materials we were able to get practically, we just did that. And as a part of the deal with Aaron, I sent him as much of the digital materials I could. And like, here it is backed up in the event you sell this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or go somewhere else, you have it archived. And anyway, the going back to someone like Carol or any of these people that are no longer with us, and a lot of the material of them is kind of hard to find clean versions of.
Mm-hmm.
We cleaned up what we could. In some cases, we used AI tools to say, hey, here's the image, clean up the image. And in some cases, that looked dreadful. Or
Okay.
in other cases, it just didn't look like them anymore because AI is just taking that and interpreting it. So we were limited on what we could do because I never wanted to present anything that wasn't of that source, if it makes sense. If I put in a picture of Carol, they could put her in any pose situation or whatever, but that's not true. That's not her. And so there was a kind of a fine line of like, well, I mean, what do I have that represents what we're talking about and can look presentable on camera? I'm sure with a larger research team, I could have found even more stuff and said, okay, we'll build this, we'll do that, and so forth. But it's very limited. I mean, with the budget we
Mm-hmm.
had, so it was kind of me saying, I can find these on eBay, I can talk to Aaron, I can pull it from this, that, the other. In some cases, we reused a shot here or there just because, yeah, you can wring a sponge only so much.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, she passed away so young. It's not only just you can't find stuff, but I mean, there was a very limited window for those sort of things to happen anyway. But yeah, I thought you did a really good job to give not just the information, but also the package that information came in with comics because the packaging is so important in a lot of ways. It's designed to catch the eye or catch the imagination. And that happened a lot in this film. The film is very good at presenting. These are stores and there's retail, but they have a very interesting and foundational part in how comics have evolved in this country and going forward. The functions that the comic shop has, like comic stores are not only selling comics to an audience, they're also building a community. They're educating creators because a lot of creators are like, I learned about comics retailing, working in these shops. So when reaching out to those stores was easier because I knew what they were looking for in terms of for independent creators, they have to have like a one-on-one relationship with so many stores. If they worked retail, they know what it's like on the other end because it's a very idiosyncratic experience. You talked about this in the movie. The customer for the publisher isn't the reader, it's the comic shop. All of these different things that spring from just the fact that these people are standing there selling comics to folks. Was there a particular aspect of the comic shop that you really were surprised by as you started to learn and research more and more about them?
I think the most interesting part of shops that I wasn't I didn't really give much thought to this, honestly, prior. I thought of the comic shop as sort of just the middleman between the publisher and the reader.
Hmm.
And the more I researched and met artists who worked in comic book stores when they were younger, or publishers who did the same, there were
Hmm.
people who were in these industries because their love of the medium of the craft kept them at the shop, and from the shop onto the industry. Car D'Angelo had an employee at his Earth 2 store, Morgan Perry. She's in the documentary somewhat briefly, but I got to interview her at a Comics Pro meeting. And she is now working in, or was at the time, may still be, she was working in manga at, I always say this wrong, it's Square Enix. Okay, everyone who just corrected me
Sure.
at home, you're right, I'm sorry. But I know them from the video game format. I didn't so much know about their commitment to manga and that industry. And anyway, she loved comics so much, was incredible at what she did at Earth 2, and was able to make that transition, as so many people do. That's one element of how comic book shops really shaped and continue to shape the market. You have that institutional knowledge that translates from the store, from the fan, from the reader, to the store experience in retail, which is its own very separate set of
Hmm.
experiences. And when you take that to the publisher, you're carrying with it this understanding of the medium, of the various types of storytelling and ways in which they speak to broader audiences, because you meet the people who are reading them, and
Hmm.
you're one of them. And to me, that was just so fascinating. I hadn't really thought about that being kind of a pipeline. And more broadly than that, how comic book shops, because they allowed for material that would not be at the Kroger, the pharmacy, sometimes the newsstand. It was allowed to be cultivated in this more insular, safer space for material that, Jeffrey says this in the movie, you're not going to find Watchmen at the 7-Eleven, with curse
Hmm.
words, nudity, and all this. It's a way to tell a story differently than what has been available in the past. And in my mind, or to my mind, it's just in such a better way. It informs what can be done and can revolutionize the industry. 1 year of really good comic sales from material that's really incredible and fantastic informs the next and the next and the next. One of the shop owners, very small store in New York, he had something like a newsstand, outdoor newsstand, with just old books in his long box. And I was talking about the industry of comics, and he said, I can tell you what's wrong with the industry of comics, man. It's capitalism, brother. It's this Ouroboros, just the snake eating its tail. And it's funny because I was like, in a way, it's really the opposite. If you remove the companies that buy these concerns, like Warner Brothers buying DC, et cetera, and more stuffed shirts who know more about wringing a sponge and then selling that sponge for more than they bought it, people who actually know and understand this stuff come from this world. It's like a reverse Ouroboros, like it's birthing itself
Mm.
constantly. And you, like a phoenix, is probably a less gross
Yeah,
and
yeah,
more often representation, because the industry does seemingly almost die from time to
yeah.
time. It's reborn in incredible ways, like Image, guys who know what they wanted to do and not wanting to be kind of held to these very specific parameters of like, no, Spider-Man can only have these kinds of problems. No one's catching an STI, or no one's, it has to be
Yeah.
family approved, family safe. And instead,
Yeah.
like, let's have some really messed up storylines full of like crazy violence. Okay, we did that. That only sold for so long. Let's make a personal tale. So many comics have come about that tell the stories of us, like humans suffering, but not with capes and boots. There doesn't need to be an allegory. It can be like Zoe Thorogood's book recently, It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth. It's so dark and it's fairly brutal, but it's honest in a
Hmm.
way that your storytelling couldn't necessarily be broadly, because audiences weren't ready for it. Comic shops helped to really allow for sophistication and a great evolution for this material, because and I credit their ability to make material for younger audiences. We think in terms of kids book that's this age to this age, and then there's young adult, and those were the demos. And now when someone tells me, hey, I have a 7-year-old, what would you recommend for that 7-year-old? If I put on my research hat, I can find material for your kid who's experienced X in their life, this age, I can find material for that specific kid. Give me a shape, give me a color slash an ethnic background, and I can find material that is designed for that young person to understand, feel seen, and not have to grapple with this idea of like, oh, this is for girls or whatever nonsense we thought when we were kids. I can
Mm-hmm,
find
mm-hmm.
material that is broad enough that can really speak to those experiences. And you would not have that without the comic book shop.
No, no. It's like the laboratory of, I almost said the laboratory of democracy, but that's, I mean, maybe.
It's a good phrase. I like it.
That's the phrase I'm trying to graft onto this idea because it feels like the same thing. It's the laboratory where all of this work gets to be created, allowed to grow into things that then got out and gave us this landscape that we find ourselves in good ways. A couple of different things hit as you were going through that. The comic shop as this crossroads of obviously retail and art, or art and commerce, that allows art to grow and not be stifled in a way that like movie theaters and all that sort of stuff, not so much, right? Like I'm spitballing this as I'm saying this, but like it can be low stakes enough that it will allow these accidents to happen that can then go on to be other larger, wonderful things. And also the comic shop that turns into a publisher, Dark Horse, right? Like that all started from a comic shop, Things from Another World. It became Dark Horse Comics, like the third slash fourth largest publisher of comics in North America the last like 40 years. So many different things can happen from comic shops because they are this weird, wonderful laboratory of art and commerce coming together. What was your first comic book shop?
Great question. I can't give you one answer, but I'll try and be brief. So, my first actual comic book shop was Titan Comics in Fayetteville, Georgia. Titans was more of a chain of stores because comics were doing great at the time, but you could find one on Riverdale Road. You could find one in Fayetteville, Georgia off Highway 85. It was near the old Kroger location, if you guys remember, before they moved to the Pavilion. No one knows what I'm talking about. But I head over heels, Titan Comics. It's down the street. There's a comic book store. I didn't know those existed until bored one day. I went through a Yellow Pages and saw, in some cases, the art that Marvel co-opted with stores. Here's the template. Put your info and buy the ad space and the Yellow Pages. And so I went to Titan. That's where I got my Jim Lee X-Men #1. Still have it from the time, and got a few other books here and there. I wasn't a collector, and books were, for the most part, you read the comic, you more or less got the gist. There are sometimes overarching stories, and more so just before the time where occasionally a villain would crop up in the last couple of pages and we might see them in the next one or never again, depending on who's writing. It was an incredible experience to go in. It was very busy, that store. I mean, in terms of what you could find. My first comic shop, though, because they closed, I want to say like 2 weeks after I went in, my grandparents had a shop.
Oops.
I'll wonder where I got the idea from my movie or to focus on that. But Quest Comics near my grandparents, it was the first store I'd ever been into. It's very much like the Ogre in Columbus in terms of layout. The new release wall went all the way around the store. It wasn't just a small section. Every surface was covered with new books. They broke them down into publisher. And in the middle, you had your long boxes with the books to complete your collection. They had their trade section, t-shirts, pogs, just everything you might want to find. And I loved that store. I adored it because I'd only been going to a newsstand next to my family's frame store and reading comics out of a box or on their spinner or however I could get them. But it wasn't as broad. That was the first store, though, that I could see everything from the door. And it felt like infinite possibility. What is it? Infinite combinations.
Infinite IDIC, infinite something, infinite company. Yeah, I'm sorry, I butchered that. But yeah,
No,
I know
it's fine. Yeah, I've been trying to think of it without looking it up. Just being able to see the possibilities there, like walking along, it's like, what is Team 7? Why is Wolverine and Sabretooth on this other book cover? What the heck is this? Why do I get uncomfortable when I see this Lady Rawhide cover? Like, I need to not look at that too long, or the lady at the counter is going to judge me. I don't know. But it was an incredible experience to see all that. And then they, of course, like so many others, they closed and then became Vengeance of Excalibur, which was not too far away. And it just keeps repeating itself for a few years. Like, I love this store. Where'd it go? And Yeah, so it's always hard to answer that question because it's like, yeah, Titan was there first and then it was gone. So like
Yeah.
technically there's comic store, but I didn't even really get a lot of time to kick the tires on that bad boy before it went
Yeah.
away.
As you were talking, I looked it up. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations.
There we go.
IDSC. Yeah, I heard you. I listened to an interview earlier and you mentioned the yellow pages, and I thought back to my own experience. So, my father was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot, and particularly going, this is like 85 to 88. We went from like Lubbock, Texas to Fort Walton Beach, Florida to Goldsboro, North Carolina. And we would get stuff on a moving truck, and the moving truck would go ahead, and then we would caravan in our cars, my mom, dad, and my two brothers, or at least one of my older brothers and I. And so we would go to a new place, and we'd be driving, we'd get into the motel or whatever. That first night, the first thing I did, I found the yellow pages, and I looked up comic shops, and they'd usually have like 5 or 6, but there'd be at least one have the ad where it would be like, you know, Batman posing with a bat symbol behind him. And I was like, okay, we need to go there. Okay, where is that? All right, I get the address. I'm looking it up. There's usually some sort of map in the back of the phone book. And I'm like, okay, how close is that to us? Is it within a distance that I can theoretically get my parents to be able to go without saying, let's go to a comic shop? Like, is it close enough to something they'd want to go to where I could be like, hey, let's go to dinner here. And maybe,
Right.
you know, we can go a little early and I can go to a comic shop and thing. And so that, I specifically remember that happening, obviously more than once. And then as I've thought about it in the years since, having your location change, but using the comic shop as a point of reference. Spider-Man is Spider-Man in Lubbock, Spider-Man is Spider-Man in Fort Walton Beach, Spider-Man is Spider-Man in Goldsboro, even though I guess technically during that time he went from the red and blue suit to the black suit, so he did in fact change.
We don't have to
But
talk
still,
about that. We don't have to talk about that at all.
yeah, but
No kidding, of course. Yeah.
you know, but having that as an anchor, no matter where I was, ended up being really important, and a nice coping mechanism to that type of, oh yes, there we go, Marvel Secret Wars #8, lo there shall come a costume, or from the I can't even read it on there.
Amid the chaos, there comes a costume.
Amid the chaos, there comes a costume. That Ninja Spider-Man, that is
Yeah,
dope.
exactly.
So good. And
But
then
you're exactly right. I mean, this is a thing that I think, especially with young people, like it's a very grounding experience. It's the reason why you want the G.I. Joe Band-Aid, or you want the thing that's branded with the thing that you love. It's not just because it has your character on it. It's because the thing, it's a known quantity, you know? It definitely brings you back to some sort of place. I can't necessarily describe it, but people have explained to me long boxes are, for a lot of collectors, the same to them as record collections are to the people who love that vinyl. It's not just the experience of the music, but I can tell you when and where I got that book and how many places that book has lived with me, because it's heavy and I've had to move these long boxes.
Yeah.
But like it has that grounding effect. And when you see the familiar in a place you're not used to, like as a kid, my parents divorced. I ended up moving from one part of Georgia to another part of Georgia. But like you say, in both Morrow, Georgia and Fayetteville, Georgia, Spider-Man is Spider-Man. And I had a through line to that experience as a child. Wolverine is still ongoing. Like, did you guys see the thing? He stabbed Sabretooth in the head. That just happened. Oh my God. And these new kids, just like the old kids, like, you're a nerd for reading this. Like, it's, hey, at least we're getting consistency from that town to this town.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as we get older, that can shift, but it shifts into a different version of that thing. You know, as life took me across the country in various places. I actually lived in Pasadena for a couple of years. So House of Secrets was not necessarily my main shop. It was a little too far away, but it was one that I went to as often as I could, with its Plastic Man bench. Do they still have that out?
So that got heisted. Actually, after the last time I was there, coincidentally, I'm not the one. I don't know if it got recovered. It was great, but then one day it was gone, and it was people. I love the fan community, because you want to get extremely angry, and some people did, and others were like, I'm sad more than angry, because this was everyone's, you know, like you experienced that at the store, but it felt like, you know, a communal table rather than, it was definitely the stores, and now I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I'm sensing a theme of store misfortune. Not every time you show up, but you're just like, he shows up and then it closes. And then he goes to House of Secrets, the
I
Plastic
used
Man
to
bench.
joke, I used to joke that I was the angel of death because one of my first jobs was a Hollywood Video and a Blockbuster. Well, those
Mm,
aren't around anymore. Then
mm-hmm.
I worked for a YouTube comedy channel. It closed while I was there. My material was great, by the way. If you go back and watch the old Ray William Johnson stuff at the end of the run, hilarious stuff.
Yeah.
I did it. But then I started working at Newegg Computers and they started having money troubles. And I'm like, man, wow, this is really starting to feel kind of personal,
Yeah.
universe, because I'm doing great.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Yeah.
you
So
know,
now you just work for yourself with the documentary and everything, and everything's fine because,
well, this is the combo breaker. This is the combo break. I made a
oh,
documentary about the history of comic book shops,
hmm
and the year it released, comic book shops on the upswing. The industry's doing pretty well. So I'm not going to take all the credit because that would be ridiculous. But
yeah, yeah,
it's a combo breaker, like, and we're doing great. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, a complete 180 on the luck there. Everything is coming up Millhouse. But it is good to see the documentary. It's good to see how many different roads can lead to success.
Stores that have a voice and a mission statement, to borrow from, business terminology, when they have those things, they really can more absolutely define what they're hoping to provide. I mean, as long as your rent doesn't get obscene and you have a good market, a nice rich market of people wanting the product you're selling, you could exist forever. Like, I love books with pictures because if you talk with Katie, her mission was, I want to bring comics to groups that aren't represented or haven't traditionally rather been represented in comics. And when she did that, I mean, that was when I started the film. It was when she was just getting on her feet and getting going. And what she was doing was exactly that. To see the people coming in, I saw more moms in that store than I've ever seen in any shop. And that's not to say, isn't it crazy that comics are for women? Because they've always been.
Hmm
But to see moms with kids coming into stores, whereas traditionally it had always been either kids on their own or dads. That had been my experience growing up. And even though my grandmother took me to most of the comics that I went to, at the very end of the film, you see for Norma in the credits. She
hmm
was amazing with that because she's like, you're reading, you're loving this. I can
hmm
go do whatever else I want for an hour because you're going to be I'll
hmm
drop you off and I'll come get you. And,
hmm
that is, the comic shop was almost the babysitter in that way. But anyway, I'm getting
Yeah.
off my point. The stores that have defined, what it is they want to be to their audience really seem to flourish more so than the ones that are the place for, I mean, being a collectible store, a pop culture store is still a point of view, is still a perspective. But
hmm
the ones that are unique are the ones that stand out for the longest. Like, my favorite store, and it's easy to say, I'm sure, is Forbidden Planet in New York. And it's not because it's super big or because it's in New York or any of those things, but the first time I walked in right out of high school, that was my senior trip of sorts, was 2002 going to New York City. I went to their old location and the vibe was just perfect. Like, it had, t-shirts from bands and some comic stuff and their own branded thing, which I hadn't seen done so well. And of course, in New York, you're going to have access to the people locally at the time who can do those designs and so forth. But it felt like the perfect crossover of everything from art books, statues, toys, things that I didn't even know you could search for online. It was there in the store, and everyone was so relaxed and chill and, willing to talk to you. Still a little
hmm
standoffish because a lot of comics people are that, or just sick of answering the same questions. Like, no, we don't have Amazing Tales or Action Comic or whatever,
Yeah.
the person's looking to get. Like, we don't carry those kinds of books, but we have, X, Y, and Z. But that store had its own unique identity. And I think when stores do that, they not only flourish, but they find their community way more quickly and that level of support. Like Desert Island Comics in New York, they fell victim to the same thing so many shops do, where it's like, hey, your rent is going up quite a bit. And
hmm
even though your store is in this old Italian market, I walked in, spoke with the owner, great guy, can't remember his name, but I was just chatting about the industry and this and that, and
hmm
that's why they're included, because that was happening right at the tail end of the film. And it was another store where people were rallying and they're like, no, we love this. This isn't, I'm not going to go in there and get my Superman books. I don't want that. I want, give me the weird stuff. Give me the stuff
hmm
that I'm not going to find at any shop that
hmm
speak to me as a lover of art and story that is uncommon, because these voices are the most interesting, almost peripheral, marginal voices that aren't just of a certain identity. You can't quite pin some of these people down. It's just weird, funky, and great. And they're publishing at a very limited scale, really carving out a niche for themselves that we provide this thing you don't just find every day.
You mentioned Desert Island, and just sort of tying back to some of the other things, Desert Island, I believe that's like Tucker Stone, maybe. They had published early, or they'd helped have the compendiums for Michelle Fife's Copra, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which has been one of the big I'll say indie, successes of the last 10 years. People that love comics, people that are in contact with people that are making comics. Hey, I want to help you do this comic thing. They are these laboratories and meeting places and crossroads of things that generate so much more than just a place where you go and go pick up Superman, right? And Superman's great. Like Superman, pick up Superman. Superman's wonderful. But it can be so much more. And also the communities around them and the communities that come out of them. And just to sort of tie this off, the educational value in people learning about comics from comic shops that know about comics. So I got into podcasting because one of the shops that I went to, I answered an ad on their board. Somebody else had a podcast and they were just like, looking for a co-host. And I was like, all right, I'll do that. This is like back in 2007 or something. Was it Costa Comics then? Or maybe I was Big Planet Comics. The same shop had been there forever, but had gone through a couple of different iterations. And I'd pulled off a tab from this thing and I answered it. And almost 20 years later, here I am doing this. But not only that, at least 2 or 3 of the people that worked there a long time, the discussions that I had with them, the things they taught me about comics are literally what I use. They're in my DNA to be able to do whatever the hell it is I do on this show. It is a direct line that I draw from wherever I am now back to having X discussion or Y discussion in these, in these shops. So, man, they're like Swiss Army knives of goodness, these shops, that they have all these different tools. And there's a wonderful documentary, Shopping for Superman, that people can get in 90 minutes, a wonderful snapshot of what comic shops are and what they have been and what they can be and all of that stuff. As we are wrapping up, do you have anything coming up that you want to talk about?
Not in the immediate future. I'm actually at a crossroads with respect to projects. I've just started. There's one project. I can talk a little bit about it. The Overpower card game that was around in the 90s as a result of Belgemus and Fleer. It was a brief bright spark. It's back, and I've been working with them, covering some of their events, and I help with the stream and that sort of thing here and there. I got to talking to the community that's wrapped up in that and said, this is its own King of Kong in a way.
Okay.
The love for this old game, it was the 90s.
I remember the ads.
From the 1900s, this game. But it's back. Lazarus Rising Games has taken over the IP and had to rebuild it because they don't own Marvel or DC IP, but it's well on its way to becoming a widely loved game. And so talking about potentially doing a documentary with them, it's still very early days, and that's going to be an ongoing thing. We'll likely have some kind of fundraiser. I'm also working on some comics of my own. Surprisingly, I've written a few short ones, and there's a long form one that I've been wanting to write for a long time. I'm on issue 2 right now of actually like a finally completed first draft that I'm happy with, and working my way through that series. So I'm going to be doing a lot more writing, and because writing is free, it's just time. It's not raising $100,000 to make a film. And the Wizard project, I definitely want to tackle, but because I'm naive in a lot of ways. I reached out to Gareb Shamus and was like, hey, I'm some idiot who made a documentary about comic book shots from the internet. I want to do one about Wizard. Would you be a part of it? And he wrote back and said, I'm actually doing my own. So I can't do that. Yeah. But I was speaking with Gib Bickle over at the Laughing Ogre, and I said, I don't know. Do I want to make a documentary about Dick Cavett because I love Dick Cavett, or do I want to do one about Wizard? And he said, well, my opinion, I probably wouldn't watch the Dick Cavett one, but given what you did with your comic shop documentary, I'd love to see your take on Wizard, because no one that I know would want to see Gareb's, because it's not going to be an honest portrayal of that experience of Wizard. Because if you're familiar with the history, history doesn't paint him in the best light. And I'm not
No,
saying in a litigious way, like no one, that's not slander.
that is objective fact.
That is objective fact. And I can refer you to the people who've made these claims, but in my mind, that still doesn't diminish what Wizard's done,
Hmm.
for the comics community, warts and all. I think it's an incredible thing. So, like I said, it's early days for a few projects. We're here in January. If you check back in with me, probably in August of this year, one of those three projects will be well on their way.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, thank you again for taking so much of your afternoon to talk about comics and the film and all of that stuff. Obviously, the door is open for you to come back whenever you have anything else to talk about. And there's a whole bunch of like movie stuff I didn't even get a chance to ask because I never get a chance to really talk about those sort of things with somebody who actually knows. But I did get my Key Grip Best Boy Gaffer question knocked out right off the bat. So that is wonderful. Wes, thank you so much. This has been fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Had a great time.
There you have it. Shopping for Superman is available on Apple Plus, Google Play, YouTube TV, Prime Video, and Blu-ray 4K disc. The Shopping for Superman YouTube channel does indeed have extended conversations uploaded to it, including interviews with retailers Joe Field of Flying Colors Comics, Joe Ferrara of Atlantis Fantasy World, Dr. Andrea Letamendi, Jeff Trexler, Dan DiDio, Dan Jurgens, and the late Jim Shooter. Do yourself a favor and go check those out. Like I said earlier, we'll be back in 2 weeks for a chat with cartoonist Kit Anderson, but until then, my name is Greg. Stay safe, enjoy those funny books, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.